Thank you for coming out to our first Complete Communities University, and thank you for coming to today's session on community outreach. Our speaker today is well versed in community outreach. She has a wealth of experience to share with you today, but I want to give you a little bit about her background. Regine G. Calvert is a native Houstonian of Chinese descent. She has seen Houston's Asian American community grow from a close-knit community, primarily a Chinese enclave where everyone knew everyone else. This might be familiar to you in some of your communities, to a sprawling, internationally diverse pan-Asian populace among the top 10 cities in the country with the largest Asian American population. She's been involved in the nonprofit field for over 30 years. Regine has worked as an organizational consultant, specializing in nonprofit board and management issues and starting up new projects and organizations. Her foray into politics occurred when she managed Martha Wong's first political campaign in 1993. Ms. Wong ended up being the first Asian American ever elected to Houston City Council. She served as Chief of Staff for Gordon Kwan from 2000 to 2004, the first Asian American elected citywide to Houston City Council, and the first Asian American Mayor Pro Tem. She's also served as Director of Personnel and Volunteer Initiatives Program, appointed by Mayor Bill White in 2004 to 2010. But this isn't her only experience. She's also served in a voluntary capacity to many organizations. Her involvement includes co-founding the Asian American Health Coalition Hope Clinic, the Houston 80/20 Asian American Political Action Committee, and she's also served on many boards, such as Leadership Houston and Blueprint Houston. For all of these reasons, she's a great person to give you background and information on community outreach, and I want to have you all welcome Regine Calvert.
Thank you. Thanks, Lynn. Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be here, and I wanted to get a sense of who's in the room. So I know this training or this workshop was focusing on our 5 complete communities. Are all of you part of one of the 5 communities? Okay, okay. So let's start. Acres Home. How many of you with Acres Home? 2. How many of you are with Second Ward? 1. Holding up the fork. Good. Third Ward. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. About 5. Near North Side. 2. Good. Gulfton. Yay. 2, 3. We got a good spread of people. That's wonderful. Well, I'm a Third Ward girl, so anyway. And so, as you know, each of these communities, I mean, you know it, you live there, many of you are probably born and raised there, have a personality. So today, what I wanted to do, let's go over, let's see. So, Abraham, just the top one?
The one with that.
The one with the, I should have practiced. Sorry. Oh, forward and backward. Okay. Today our agenda will be looking at the diversity of Houston. I mean, that goes without saying. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, before you get into that, I'm sorry. What was that you mentioned? Acres Home, Second Ward. What were the different areas you did?
Third Ward, near North Side, and Gulfton. Those are our first 5 complete communities, and Lynn and Abraham can tell you all about them because they've been working on this for a couple of years now. And we thank the mayor for identifying these communities as being the first to begin the complete communities process. But today I want to go over the entire city and how it has evolved in its diversity. And I don't mean just racial and ethnic diversity, but all other kinds of demographics. And then we'll talk a little bit about reaching your audience, method and madness, I said, and then some time for Q&A. And then if we have time, maybe a little bit of an exercise that we can get involved in, okay? So, the diversity of Houston. I wanted to also get a sense of how many of you have lived in Houston for over 25 years. Oh, wowie. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 7 if I counted right. How about 15 to 25 or 24? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Somebody's, okay. 5 to 14 years? Okay, and how about under 5 years? Newbies? 1, 2. All right, well, then many of you in this room have been here a long time, so this may not all be brand new to you, but it might be nice to kind of rehash it. All right, this is a map of what? What shape is that? Yes, ma'am. Very good. The reddish color that you see predominantly is where all the census tracts in those areas that are red were predominantly Anglo. The darker color here is primarily, the majority were African American. This tan color here, if you could see it, was primarily or majority Hispanic. And the greenish color, so the pea color, was where there was no majority. It was, you know, a mixed up group. Okay, this is 1980. This is how our county looked, okay? This is 1990, 10 years later. Went back, did the same thing. And you can see that this green color is starting to grow. The red is pretty predominant still, but around in the surrounding county, not the inner city. Of course, this is our loop system, the 610, and then this is the Beltway, right? And then the tan is growing a little bit. This is 2000. So you see the growth of the community. The green, again, is getting more. And then the red is still shrinking up, but it's still pretty predominant out in the outer edges of the county. And certainly the tan colored, which is the Hispanic, is growing. And our African American community is growing. This is 2010. And you can see how it's changed a lot, right? And if you, most of you will live within the inner city here or maybe right outside, so you can testify to how that looks. But even the county outside the city limits have changed. And what does this say to you? The transition, what is it saying to you? What implications does it have as our county where we live? Amen to that. And it also says to me that people are living together everywhere. It's not like we're all predominantly one group or other, but we're moving into different neighborhoods, and that's the way it should be. So that's something I thought you'd find real interesting over the last, 40 years, how things have changed. And 2020 is right on the horizon. Everybody do their census, right? It's going to come up. We've got to be counted. And once the data are out, we'll add to this map and see how things have changed. Now, the next slide, and Lynn's going to do this. This is a little bit of a lengthy YouTube, but I just thought it was a great way of depicting the changes in our community, and I thought you'd like to see it. So if you bear with me, we're going to show it, and I'll turn off some lights so it'll be easier to see here.
So the reasons that we identify Houston as growing so rapidly is certainly climate, job growth, its open policies in terms of attracting jobs, by far the largest non-zoned city and area, so that there's a lot of flexibility, and its closeness to Latin America. In the case of Houston, it grows a little bit different than Atlanta and Dallas in that it's largely driven by immigrants. So people in the U.S. may not think of Houston as, boy, that's the place I want to live. Because they're younger as immigrants, they have high birth rates, which also drives the overall growth of the city and the metro. 80,000 of the growth is from Katrina evacuees from New Orleans. Growth, population growth, helps drive economic growth. You have to build new houses, that's more jobs, so that produces more money for more services. And so where growth goes, so does economic growth.
Houston is extremely diverse. The city of Houston, inside the loop, is extremely diverse. You've got all the groups and they're almost kind of evenly distributed throughout. But the fact of the matter is that it's also very segregated in terms of how the degree of segregation between blacks and whites. So I think the complicated thing about Houston is that you have diversity and you have segregation, and we tend to think that diversity makes segregation sort of go away. But we actually have something more complicated happening, because you have some places that have multiple groups being represented almost evenly, and then you have some places like the Woodlands or even like Pasadena, where it's primarily Hispanic, where you have one group kind of dominating and then other groups sort of being evenly distributed throughout. So you've got kind of both things happening, and so it really creates, I think, a lot of interesting questions about understanding, so what is this going to mean for where people live and sort of how people think about relationships between groups.
The area known as Frosttown, on the northeast edge of downtown, was likely settled before Houston.
They were individual farmers, but they were little settlements like Harrisburg, like Lynchburg, like White's Landing.
And the Anglos were the first purchasers of these lots. However, in a matter of 5 to 7 years, Germans began to come into the community and began to purchase property, build homes, settle there. And for an entire generation, they were the prominent signature of that area, all the way up until like the 1880s, before it began to shift away from being a solid German community.
The German population had waned by the late 1800s.
The Germans moved out, a great number of working blacks moved into the community. And after about 1910, there was a great influx of Hispanics to this same neighborhood. So by the period of 1936 to 1955, which was the Barrio de Alacron period, it was mostly a Hispanic neighborhood.
At the turn of the last century, the early 1900s to be more exact, Magnolia Park, once a tree-lined recreational park near the banks of the Buffalo Bayou, became home to thousands of Mexican families who fled from the then raging Mexican Revolution or to find better opportunities in a new homeland. Mexicans arrived to work on the cotton compresses, the railroads and shipyards, and helped establish the world-renowned Port of Houston, the second busiest port in North America. Today, Magnolia Park is a burgeoning community of industry, producing prominent leaders and businesses run by the hardworking families who still reside there.
There's over 125,000 Hispanic-owned businesses in Harris County. We're excited about being a part of that, and we really believe as they continue to do well that Houston can continue to do well.
The Houston area remains a society in transformation. According to the U.S. Census, the Hispanic share of the Harris County population grew from 6% in 1960 to more than 40% by 2010.
And the other big piece of this is that of everybody in Harris County under the age of 19 years old or younger in all of Harris County, 51% are Latinos.
Wow.
19% are African Americans.
So the majority now.
Just 22% are Anglos. So that's our future.
African Americans post-emancipation were settling down in Houston in the what was known as the 4th Ward, which is west of Houston's downtown area. We had doctors, we had dentists, we had religious leaders who were also professionals. We had teachers, a lot of teachers, male and female.
One prominent resident of Freedmanstown was Reverend Jack Yates.
He was a symbol of progress. This is someone who didn't have much to begin with, former slave, learned how to read, and he became a leader in the church.
Freedmanstown was almost a city within a city, with its own business district.
In any area that you can think of that you need for your livelihood, we had to operate a business to support us, because no one wanted to take any of our business. So we had to have our own cleaners there. They didn't want us eating in their food establishments. So we had to have our own food cafes, restaurants.
Anyone who came to Houston in the 30s and 40s it was almost understood that if you didn't go up on Dowling Street, you hadn't visited Houston. It was like the Mecca, it was the place.
Yeah, what's the old African proverb? It takes a village to raise a child. So this is what they had in here.
At the time of being a kid, it was just excellent because there was so many of us kids. I don't know how much fun it was for our parents, but us kids had plenty of fun. From street to street, over and over, and side to side, just children.
People always ask me, what made you start shape? Hey, look, when something is your passion, you're gonna look for something to make you do it. You're gonna do it, if you can. And family is my passion.
I think most African Americans who seek to be connected with African American culture, when they arrive in Houston, somehow they find the Third Ward. And if you find the Third Ward, then you will ultimately find Shape Center.
Houston ranks 4th among U.S. cities in the percentage of its population that is Asian and 5th in the total number of Asians. Though Latinos comprise the largest ethnic group in Houston, the Asian American population has grown the fastest, expanding by 70% between the 2000 and 2010 censuses, which is more than any other group. 16 years ago, nearly 90% of the Asian population were immigrants. Today, a much larger percentage of Asians are second generation.
You ask a typical Anglo, how come Asians have been so well in America? You get a version of what's called the model minority myth. Well, the Asians came here with nothing, with no money, no education, no command of English, and by virtue of hard work, strong family values, and high intelligence, Asians have succeeded. The model minority myth puts 27 different nationalities, major differences in culture, major differences in socioeconomic status, in reasons for coming to this country. You've got professionals coming as engineers and doctors, you've got Filipino nurses, and you've got Vietnamese coming as refugees.
The largest refugee ethnic group, the Vietnamese, started coming here in the 1970s. Lena Tran settled here more recently, and her children know little of Vietnam. Houston is now home to 70,000 refugees from 78 countries, and around 2,000 more come here each year. This city offers a booming economy, lots of jobs, and a very diverse population. There are many agencies and support groups for refugees in Houston, but one of the most important is the YMCA International Services. The YMCA's Amy Blows says the organization helps get refugees started in their new life here.
Our goal really is self-sufficiency for refugees.
She says there are local college programs to help such people, but especially when there are language barriers to overcome, it can take a long time.
We have a very interesting situation in a modern society regarding Native Americans these days. On the one hand, they are Americans like everyone else. They are Native Americans. On the other hand, they are independent nations. They have their own cultural values. Their efforts to retain and preserve those cultural values is an ongoing dilemma for the tribes. It does cause some individuals within certain tribes a lot of difficulty, and they have difficulties in adjusting to this dual identity, if you will. Others have learned to adapt and find their place in the world and live as Native Americans, number one, and as Americans, number two.
Montrose, an interesting, colorful, historic neighborhood near downtown Houston.
It was a cheap area for people to move in. It was artists, it was resale shops, and the gay community.
We were urban pioneers. We moved into an area no one wanted to live in. We fixed it up. It became popular. Of course, it drove up the prices. Other people couldn't afford to live here.
With the onset of HIV and so many men having to sell their properties, either because they were sick or the families inherited and they sold them, we don't have the gay population.
A lot of gays are moving outside of the suburban areas because it's not as costly.
To the gay movement, the bars were what the churches were to black movement. It was the only institution they would let us have. And that also made us easy targets. The cops would come in and arrest every woman in the bar who had pants with zippers or buttons in the front. That was perceived by the police officers to be cross-dressing. Your name gets printed in the Houston Post and Houston Chronicle the next day. All of a sudden, your life is destroyed. And it is not infrequent that people commit suicide after getting picked up in a bar for doing nothing wrong.
For 34 years, I've been told I'm a second-class citizen. I was designated female at birth. I came out as a lesbian 6 weeks shy of my 19th birthday in 1989 before Melissa Etheridge, before Ellen DeGeneres. I had no role models. I came out as a transgender man 6 years ago, but I still get discriminated against. I've been denied care at Penton. I've watched loved ones be denied care in the emergency room at St. Luke's. I want to pass to the rest of the world that we are equal. Like I said, I didn't have any role models because nobody was able to come out. It was hard then, and it's hard now. And I stand here today before you as a proud Houstonian, as a proud trans man, in hopes that other young people are able to stand up and speak for themselves.
1848, the first Women's Rights Convention is held in New York, calling for equal treatment of women and men under the law and voting rights for women. 1920, the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote, is signed into law. 1963, Congress passes the Equal Pay Act, making it illegal for employers to pay a woman less than what a man would receive for the same job. 1972, the Equal Rights Amendment is passed by Congress and sent to the states for ratification.
The women here represent the thousands officially opening the first government-sponsored convention on women's rights.
The cause of equal and human rights will reap what is sown. November 18 through November 21, 1977. What will you reap? What will you sow?
1982, that amendment dies when it fails to achieve ratification by a minimum of 38 states. 2009, President Barack Obama signs the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Restoration Act.
Women's experiences are changing, and the changing experience of the woman's life has led to her being able to go into different fields. But are we seeing that in the job force?
At this point, no, that hasn't changed much. Last year, the top 3 employment occupations for women were still the nurses, the medical fields, education, and we've had those roles or those jobs. I mean, that's always been a women-dominated field.
Americans have served in Iraq and Afghanistan, many of them more than once. The VA tells us about 20% come home with post-traumatic stress disorder, known as PTSD. A few of our troops return to become something they never thought they could be, criminals.
One of the things I swore that I'd never do was go to jail. And for 7 days, I was in the county jail. I couldn't deal with my own demons.
The demons came in Iraq. One day, his Marines were in a convoy. There was a bomb. 2 were killed in this Humvee.
You know, taking responsibility for those 2 guys that we lost, I mean, I just felt responsible more and more so. And now, my whole support group, my brothers, Marines, they were gone.
It turned out another military brother was also in the criminal justice system, an Army veteran.
All rise. Harris County Veterans Court now in session.
Texas State District Judge Mark Carter. Carter was watching fellow veterans broken before the bench a few hundred times a month. Carter also knew that the VA hospital a few miles away had plenty of empty seats in programs for PTSD and addiction.
You have to put them in a program that's going to help them, that's going to make them be successful. All right? If you just put them out there on probation, they're going to fail. If you put them on probation that's tailored to deal with their problems, PTSD and drug use, then they'll be successful and they won't have to go to prison.
Houston, I think, has done a fairly good job of embracing the different types of religious expressions that we now have, but we have to keep that going, and we have to do more and more bringing the traditions into the Houston moral community.
The most constructive way of bringing together closer ties among persons of different faith is to call them to account on the basis of their faith statement and realize that whatever doctrinal differences we have, we all believe that God has a calling for us.
The kind of thing that I see in this room right now, it's kind of a rainbow of backgrounds and of traditions, and it would be a great thing, at least if our children could see this kind of diversity.
No city has been transformed as fully, as completely, as suddenly, as irreversibly as Houston, Texas. It's fair to say that this city, throughout all of our history, was basically a biracial southern city dominated and controlled in an automatic, taken for granted way by white men. In the space of the last 30 years, has become one of the most ethnically and culturally diverse cities in the country. Gradually, reluctantly, but unmistakably, coming to grips with the challenges of the 21st century. But at this very same moment has come this fundamental, irreversible transformation in the ethnic composition of the Houston, the Texas, and the American population. Quick sense of why here, why now, what's the historical background for this? Well, between 1492 and 1965, 82% of all the human beings on the face of this earth who came to these shores came from Europe. Another 12% were African Americans originally brought here as slaves to serve the Europeans. There was a handful of Chinese and Japanese working as farmers and laborers in California and Hawaii. During the 1960s, suddenly 3.5 million immigrants came to this country. Only 38% were from Europe. In the 1970s, 5 million came. Only 18% were Europeans. 1980s, 10 million immigrants came. In the 1990s and the 2000s, 11.5 million new immigrants came to this country. 88% coming from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and Caribbean. And the United States, that throughout all of its history have been an amalgam of European nationalities, is becoming a microcosm of the world. The first nation in history that can say, we are a free people and we come from everywhere.
Okay. Lynn, if you would turn on the lights for us. Thank you. So did you learn anything new from this, or did you pretty much know it all? It's a good backdrop. It's not going to tell you exactly about community outreach, but what it does give you is sensitivity that our community as a whole is very different, very diverse, and your individual areas that you're going to be reaching in, comprises maybe some portion of these various things. So the first lesson to remember is to know your audience, okay? And the YouTube talked about mainly, as I said before, racial, ethnic, other kinds of sociological differences and all. But there's also educational levels, income ranges, those kinds of demographic information that you need to kind of size up when you're looking at the group that you're reaching. Geographic, so all of you, as we found out, represent different parts of the city, and you represent a community that has a label, an identity. And sometimes it's pretty broad and pretty big and diverse and varied. So you might have to go down a little bit lower or closer to the ground, and that might be zip codes. So you may look at a certain zip code in your neighborhood, or census tracts, which is even smaller than a zip code. You've probably heard these terms before. And then a block level, which is even smaller than a census tract. And those last two, census tract, block level, are terms used by the Census Bureau. And so when data come out about us, because we've all filled out those census forms, right? They are usually reported out in those configurations. And that's how you really get down to the more I don't want to say microscopic, but you know, a more closer level of what your community looks like, what your neighborhood looks like if you really want to see. Then there are other kinds of things to look at, common interests like hobbies, commitments. A lot of times religious interests are the same. So I think just in generality, I wanted you to just be aware of the fact that you need to know your audience and try to look at them in these different ways. The YouTube, again, I think brought out the historic, political, economic, religious, social perspectives that we all bring to this. And when you approach people, it's good to keep that in mind because, you know, they may be seeing things a little bit differently because of that perspective. Now, the next thing is reaching your audience. And I've sort of broken it out very simply. The old-fashioned way, the new-fashioned way, some personal outreach, and special considerations. So the old-fashioned way, generally, I say, not absolutely, but generally reaches the more older and established audiences like myself. Those techniques usually is how you can reach us best, okay? Just to keep in mind. So flyers, ads in either the community newspaper, neighborhood newspaper, or, you know, even the big newspapers, newsletters, community organizations leaders. Now, again, depending on the group of people, some folks are really tied to their religious institution. And when I say these things, I don't mean to just stereotype, but in general, we find certain communities, such as the African American community, and if you dispute this, please speak up or question it. They're tied a lot to their religious institutions. And so in order to reach a great number of them, it's good to go through the religious institution or leaders, trusted leaders in the community. The Vietnamese community is another group, and a lot of Asian communities also are tied to their religious institutions. But remember, in the Asian community, they represent almost every religion there is in the world, and so it's very diverse. Civic neighborhood organizations, that's another good way to reach some folks. Again, you've got some trusted leaders there, but if you know your neighborhood well, you may also find that sometimes you have different factions, and it's good to kind of be aware of those things so that you don't offend one or the other. I know so some of you are nodding your heads. We know, we've been out there. It's not easy. You're kind of stepping on landmines. But in my experience, the best thing to do is to really go out, listen, learn, meet the folks. And I think that's what Lynn and staff did at Planning Department. They created the neighborhood support teams. When they first started the Complete Communities, many of you probably are on those teams, to begin talking together about what you want to accomplish, gaining trust with each other, learning the nuances, because, you know, we're sometimes, I hate to say, but outsiders coming in to help, but we may not know all the nuances. And so we really depend on you as community leaders to help guide us. Professional organizations, those are sometimes good groups to go to, again, to learn about the community. And then social organizations. Then there's the new-fashioned way. And I can't speak as adeptly on this because I'm not a younger and more technologically oriented audience, but many of you are. And I don't want to just say if you're not young, you aren't, because we have lots of folks in here that are very good on technology. And the usual ones you all know, social media, including Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm told that the younger the audience is, they tend to go to Instagram. Facebook evidently is old stuff now, and we older people are even, and that's how you tell us that it's older people using it. But Facebook also, you can purchase ads which are fairly inexpensive and target your audience. So that's kind of an economic and efficient way to outreach. So if you want a certain zip code or a certain group, I'm doing a project now in Gulfton, and we're aiming it at 18 to 30-year-olds. So we did purchase some ads that are interesting to that age group, hopefully attracting their attention, and then they'll, you know, see our Facebook ad. And then Twitter, of course, is getting it all out in a big way. Now, the thing with Facebook, Twitter, these social media ways, is that it's a great way to reach a large number, but it's not, in my estimation, as quality oriented. It's not as dependable. You may get large numbers clicking on it saying, oh, I'm coming, and then the event happens and you didn't get those numbers. So it's an easy way for someone to say, oh yeah, that sounds good. And they probably meant to come, but you know, they're not obligated because they didn't promise anyone, right, in particular. And so it's okay if you use it, but just know that sometimes those numbers are going to be a little misleading. Whereas, and then in email, I put that in there. Some of us use that a lot. Personal outreach, on the other hand, which is another way, and the old-fashioned way I call it, it's just much more qualitative in terms of they know you and you have reached them personally. You've taken the time. So visiting key community leaders, like I said, organizations, making a visit to them, speaking out about what it is you're trying to talk about, door to door. Now, this is more like a political campaign technique, but it does work, and that's just going door to door in a certain area and giving out a postcard or whatever it is you're handing out. And then standing and hand out. Now, yeah, you've got to get permission, but you could go to a highly trafficked area, a store, retail, or a mall in your area, and, you know, give out your message. So these are more personal outreach, and then, you know, they see you face to face and they get to know you, and they feel a little bit more obligation or commitment to come to whatever the event or to learn about whatever it is you're talking about. Then there are special considerations in any outreach, and again, this goes back to know your audience. Language, and because 1 out of every 4 Houstonian is generally from another country, language is going to be a major issue, especially with a lot of first-generation immigrants and refugees still in our community. Language and culture is tightly related to that. Just be aware of it, and you may have to use ethnic newspapers, or you may need to have your message translated, again, depending on who you're trying to reach. And it could be in Spanish, Vietnamese, Chinese, Urdu. There's just a lot of languages in our city that are spoken. Impaired vision and hearing. We often forget about that. But again, depending on what it is you're trying to share, it may be very important that the size font, I mean, it's a little thing, but it's critical, especially with older people too. Make sure it's not really small and that people can't read it, and that it is clear and you know, easy to read, that, which takes us to comprehension and writing level. We forget about that, and sometimes we're just, you know, writing out stuff and hadn't really thought or tested it with somebody else maybe, that is this clear? Is it written a little bit too high level? Do we need to change a few words so that it's easier to understand? So just keep that in mind. Sometimes using less text and more illustrations. You know, a picture says 1,000 words, right? So think about, is this the best way to, you know, share this information, to impart this information? Is there a better way? Infographics is this new term where you turn all of these words and numbers into something easy and more appealing to look at and to understand. So again, think about that, how to better express it. And then when you are writing something or using an illustration even, or a photograph, think about the tone and approach. Again, keep in mind cultural, historical, political things, and just be sensitive to it, be aware, and you know, put all these lenses on as you're putting something out. Okay, so they were general tips, if you will, that just from my own experience I always think about, and just wanted to see if you all have any questions now. We've got a few more minutes. Yes, ma'am.
Have you noted a gathering that pulled teenagers, some specific techniques besides Twitter and things? I know they're there.
Yeah.
Pulling them to something of substance.
So that's a project I'm working on now, actually working with younger people and what will maintain their interest, you know, and using techniques. So we've been trying to, you know, role playing, again, if you're doing a workshop or something, using techniques that appeal to young people. But one of the best things to do, if you have the time and ability, is to do a focus group. That's another thing that helps you identify your population. If you could emulate the group you're trying to reach and identify a few, you don't need more than 6 to say 10 people that would be willing to sit with you and ask them questions that you want answered and to see how they approach it. Focus groups are one of the best ways to gather quality input from a group that you're trying to reach. So they would be good at saying, we don't go for these kinds of things. We don't listen to this station. We don't use TV. So those were some of the questions we asked our focus groups. How do you receive information? And most of them said, you know, again, through these online news things, not through necessarily the TV or radio. But those that did, okay, what stations do you listen to? And so a lot of them were cable stations. So it does give you insight as to where they are. But that's one good way, is to pull together people that resemble the group you're trying to reach and hear from them. How do they like to receive their information? What pushes their buttons best? And have young people help you plan, not people like me. So that was the other thing, is to bring on our team younger people so they can help.
Okay, coming from Second Ward, I moved in about 10 years ago.
Okay.
So there's a group, like gentrification truly happened.
Yep.
So people from like me, moving in, are trying to, not me myself, but people are getting pushed out, they feel, and the people who already live there feel like, okay, no more needs to come in. And so we have this battle of who's gonna be heard at some of these meetings. I am so surprised that Second Ward did not show up. They usually show up.
We had one. We have one. Where are you? Oh, that's you.
Man, they usually don't look like me when they come.
Well,
if it's Second Ward.
Yeah,
I'm,
it's true.
I'm shocked, but it's just like when you come to and there's one that's very loud and vocal, but I don't know how you bridge the gap between gentrification and existing community.
Who else has that issue? The new and the old. Third Ward. Near North Side. Probably Golfton may be the only one in the room that may not see it yet.
May I make a suggestion?
Yes, sir, please.
One of the things that I would say is go to other areas where those problems are already going on. And specifically, we're from Third Ward, so that's a civic club leader over there. And several of us are with what you call EEDC. Have you ever heard of that? I'm sorry.
I have not. Write it down.
It's called Emancipation Economic Development Council. Now, it was started by Rick Lowe, who you saw up there, and several pastors. I'm one, but I was not one of the original ones that started it. And it's a huge organization facing the gentrification problem in Third Ward. And I must tell you, I hope you don't hear it as prejudice, but I'm telling you, in Third Ward, significant advances are being made to get along. Okay. Do you still have the clash? Sure you do, because they're competing interests. But what I noticed in one of those scenarios was a working together, putting those two leaders on the same committee. I'm talking, when I say leaders, I'm talking about people who.
The
represent
old,
different
the old
interests.
established and the newer ones you're talking about.
And to me, it was a pleasant thing. Now, did I say it was easy? No, because they're all competitive interests, right? But I would say go to those places, whether it's Acres on Third Ward or is it Edo's?
Edo's, yeah.
Okay, go to other places other than yours. Talk to some leaders, and there are plenty of them that will sit down and talk with you. Dr. Asada Richards, you can write that down. Dr. Asada Richards, Center for Research Institute, Third Ward. Rick Lowe, Project Roadhouse. Shall I say that name, my brother? Shall I give you that? You up? You can certainly talk to my brother. Like I said, he's a city club leader. He knows very well.
So that's a great suggestion.
Connect with other people.
Talk to others that are experiencing, and they're in this room. Yeah.
I can connect you to some folks at Near North Side.
Near North Side, that's another good one. Lynn?
What's so interesting about that? The same problem that you're trying to address. The interesting thing is then you would be taking a universal approach and would show other people what to do.
Lynn, from the planning department's perspective, have you all addressed this?
We have talked about it. The hard part is there's no easy solution.
Right.
And what might work in one area doesn't work in another area. So we're trying to work with community groups on that community level. And there are some thoughts, but we're still working on that issue.
So, you know, part of it is also having an enlightened leadership like yourselves. And so that's what you probably need to do first, is find others in your neighborhood, in your community, that feel the same way you do and have the ability to bring people together. It's a trait that's not easy to find, but there are people with that. And I think building that trust, it does take some time. But a lot of our inner city, especially inner loop communities, are facing that. And it's so hard because so many of these residents have been in these neighborhoods for so long, and then all of a sudden, you know, it gets discovered and we do good things there for the good of the neighborhood, but then on the other hand, the flip side is it does start to get popular, too expensive to live in, drives the folks out that were always there. And so we got to think of ways, and maybe there are also, and I don't know, because that's a question that I've always pondered, is how do we welcome community development and neighborhood, you know, improvements, but not create gentrification to the negative side of it, where we drive away communities, especially older residents that have been there. And so sometimes it may also take, and I don't know if the city's looking into it, but policies that are established to protect people like that.
That's what Near North Side is doing.
Okay,
I would
sure.
put you in touch with Cynthia Reyes-Revilla with Avenue CDC. Yeah. But she and a group have drafted, I forget exactly what kind of legislation it is, but it's called Chapter 42.
Oh.
Yeah.
The famous Chapter 42.
Yeah, so she's really pushing that throughout the Near North Side.
Yes, ma'am.
And I have seen, is it Community Land Trust?
Yes.
One of the programs who complete
Yes.
communities, and so I think there was a meeting, or there's going to be a meeting in Second Ward. I'm a part of the Economic Growth and Jobs Complete Communities group.
Yes.
I guess
Yes.
I'm part of that group.
Right.
And so I think just getting, I think existing members come is the people that move in that think they're not, that it'll go away, are people that are not coming to some of these events.
That's the other thing, is getting people interested and committed to join in and help. I've lived in a community, a neighborhood, it's just outside the loop, but we consider ourselves inner city. And, you know, we've been around for 60, 70 years as a neighborhood, but it's so hard to get people involved. The civic club, our little civic club, it's a voluntary thing. It's not, you know, homeowners association where you're mandated. And you just have to, you know, get them involved, and it's hard, So, yes, ma'am.
With Chapter 42, what is it really supposed to do?
It creates a minimum lot size so that you cannot have an investor come in and buy property piecemeal. and then tear down a bunch of homes and put up like a few townhomes, which would then destroy the character of the neighborhood.
Okay. And I'm sorry, if you have any questions regards of minimum lot size, building lines, ordinance, you can talk to me after this. I deal with this ordinance on a daily basis.
Okay.
So I'll be happy to help you or anybody.
That's Abraham, yeah. So Abraham and Lynn are both with the planning department, and they oversee this kind of stuff. And the community land trust, or the land trust, that's
Okay.
yeah, that's great. But that's another technique. And anything going on with land trusts that we should know about?
So Asada Richards, who's actually in 3rd Ward, came out to Acres Home to speak about the land trust, is going to 2nd Ward, and so she and other board members are making their rounds. If you don't know what that is, it's a community land trust where the land is held by the nonprofit organization in order to keep the price of housing low. The homeowner actually purchases the facility, the actual building, and can, over time, as the building appreciates, can sell it in the future if they want, and can get appreciation from that. But the land value is held by the nonprofit, keeping the price lower so you can reach a lower income client and keep housing affordable for a long period into the future.
Not just the land value, but the land ownership.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, basically preventing the outside builders coming in and buying Acres Home, all tracts of land that we have, and, you know, putting townhouse on it will be a part of the community land trust, so they don't have that option to purchase those.
The land trust would decide what type of building.
Right.
Did you have a question, sir?
My question or comment would be a little bit different. I thought it would, for me, it would be helpful maybe for others to know how to get access to those demographics, statistics, and things you were mentioning as you were teaching.
How do you get them? Is that your question? Okay, good. So Abraham and Lynn, I know will answer that. So each of the 5 complete communities have a whole profile, right?
We do have data online that you can use, not only for the 5 complete communities, but across the city in general. So that even if you're not in one of the 5 complete communities, you can also contact me or Abraham, and we'll get you in touch with the people in the planning department that can provide you statistics.
Did that answer your question? Okay. So really, any configuration doesn't have to be, as she said, 5 complete communities. It could be anything super neighborhood level, which is a conglomeration of neighborhoods, or down to a set of census tracts. If you would identify, what they are, they'd help you. So our technology has been much improved, and so there's interactive maps and things you can pull up and help you identify. How about Gulfton? Anything in Gulfton going on that may be a little different from the older established neighborhoods? Nothing? Okay, that's great. I think you probably are challenged by some different things. You have a younger population in Gulfton generally, highly, many foreign-born, so they kind of operate on a different set of things, right? So outreaching to them is a little bit different. Yeah. Any other comments, questions?
You did a great job.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you for that. And I'm available if you need me. And I was going to put I forgot. If you need my email, you can just write this down. It's Rogene, my name, ROGENE, and then it's outreach strategist, which is the company I work with, and that's strategist with the S at the end, .com.